So till now we talked about data binding, where we were transferring the data from the component class to the template. But what about transferring the data between components? Let's see what is data sharing, and then we'll understand how can we transfer the data between these components. Let's go ahead. To share data in between the components, the input and the output decorators can be used for communication between components having parent and children relationship. It means for now we'll be looking at a sharing way where one component is a parent to the other component. Like right now we had an app component in which we made the first component. So the app component is the parent and the first component is its child. Let's see in the code to get a better feel of that. So we have, after making the first component, we got this first folder inside our app folder. Inside this app, we had this app.component.html where we used the app first to run our component. So our component is being called inside this app component, which means app component is the parent and our first component is the child component. So now we'll be looking at how can we transfer data between this app component to this first component. Let's open this app component TS file. So we have simple one property here, which is title and nothing else. Let's try to add a new property which says parent message, and this can be of string and which could say this is from parent. Component. Let's save this. So we want this variable or this property parent message to be transferred to our first component. Now to do that, we'll go to this app component.html file, and here we will use property binding. How do we use a property binding here? So to use a property binding, first we use a square bracket and that is equals to some variable. This variable is inside our app or our TS file, and here we give the property. So here we will give this variable name or this property name. And what should we give inside this square bracket? This is where we'll give the variable name uh, which the component, the app component will receive. The first component will receive. So let's say child variable. Now let's define this child variable in our first components TS file. So first component.ts file. Now here we cannot just directly define it and then the value will be transferred. This is where the at the rate input decorator comes into play. So we write at the rate, then input, then within the parentheses, we give the same particular variable which we gave as a property inside our HTML file. So this child variable will come here as a string. Now after that, we can define a variable or a property which we can use to which we can use for interpolation and print the data on an HTML page. So let's say message from parent, and this can be of type any because we don't know what type of data will be coming. So it's better to have type any. This is a way we have actually defined, and we are saying that whatever input is coming by the name of child variable, deliver it to this property, which is message from parent. And now we can use this message from parent property in our HTML, and we can use interpolation to print the data stored in it. Let's have a new H3 element which says message from parent, and right below this, within our two curly braces, we give this name of the property or the variable name. Let's save this and go back to our page. We see this is from a parent component getting printed here. Now let's zoom in a bit. Now let's try to change this at the same time to see if it's actually linked to the variable in a parent component. We go back to our app component.ts file, and let's try to change and write something more after this string. And we add some more text into the string, and let's go back to our page. We see the same thing gets printed here. So whatever we are seeing is actually binded to this property, which is in the parent component of the component we are actually displaying in this page. So this is how we use @input decorator to transfer data from parent component to the child component. So the first thing we did was we use an @input, then within the parentheses and with as a string, we gave the name of the variable which we used inside our parent HTML while connecting it as a property binding. Then we can give the local variable which will save the data and which we can use in interpolation to display the data. While in that HTML where we give our app components HTML tag, there in that HTML tag, we can add this property to connect these two variables. This was the way we use @input decorator to transfer the data from parent component to child component. Now let's have a look how we can do the reverse of that using @output decorator. So let's go to the next slide. Now let's talk about how we can transfer the data from the child component to the parent component. Let's go back to our code. So to do that, let's just review what we did while transferring data from the parent component to the child component. So the crux lies here. When we were calling the child component with the HTML tag, we use this property binding. And with the help of this property binding, we were able to transfer the parent message variable to the property, which was actually a variable in the class of the child component. But the reverse is not possible because we don't have the HTML component or the HTML element of the app of the parent component here. So what we can do is actually we can create an event and then transfer that event from the child component to the parent component. Let's see how we can do that. First, let's go to our child component, and similar to what we had uh, a decorator and input decorator. Similarly, now we will need an output decorator. So to use the output decorator, we use the and at the rate sign, then O capital, then output. Remember to use the one which has some text written after it so that it automatically imports the output from the desired destination. So you can verify that after clicking this, the output was automatically added here and it was imported. So we need not to worry about that. If you face any error, please verify that you have imported the input and output in the import setting here. Now let's go ahead. With this output, we can have a new event. And how can we make the new event? We can have the variable name of the event. We can say it as child event, and that is equal to, now we need to create an object which is an event emitter. This is sort of an event emitter which will emit an event. So to create an object, we use the new keyword, then the class name. It is event emitter. Again, you can use the one with the text after it so that it imports automatically. Don't forget the parentheses, then close it. So now child event is a property which is of type event emitter. Now let's create an event and we can then use some DOM event to trigger that. To trigger that, we need some function. So let's create a function, or here we call it method. So fire event. And in this method, we can say this dot child event dot emit, and with this emit function or a method of child event or the event emitter, you can say we can send the string to our parent class or parent component. So we can say hello from the child component. Now let's create a DOM. Let's attach this to a DOM event in our HTML file with a button maybe so that we can call this method. Let's go to our HTML file. Now let's create a button, and now we can use the event binding here using parentheses. Then inside that we specify the DOM event and then click, and within the now we can give the function name or the method name, which is fire event with parentheses because it's a function. Now close the button, and inside the button we can write click to send text to parent. Now we have emitted the event, and when we'll click the button, this fire event function or the method will be called. Now let's go to our parent component and try to receive this event there. So let's go to our parent HTML file. Here now we can use the event binding rather than using the property binding. Let's delete this. Yeah. So now we use the event binding. So to use the event binding, we say the event here and this within the parentheses, and this is equals to some JavaScript inside this. So within the event, we can give the name of the event we want to we have just made, and it was child event. Now let's save it here, and this is equals to we can save the message into some variable, maybe message child variable is equal to We specify dollar for variable, and we use a variable called event. So this is the JavaScript which says whatever is in a event, the variable event is equals to the message child variable. Now let's define this message child variable in our parent class. So this can be of type any for now. And now let's show that this message child is actually getting updated by using interpolation. We can copy this and go to our parent HTML file and replace this text within the h2 element, and inside our curly braces, double curly braces, we can interpolate this variable. So let's see if it's working. Let's go back to our page, and we have this button here which says you can see the hello world was deleted, and there is nothing here because right now the message child value is nothing because we haven't clicked the button. So when we'll click the button, the DOM event click will happen, and along with that there's a function, and that function says fire event, and within that fire event we have defined to emit an event which sends a string, and that string is getting replaced here with a message child variable, and that message child variable will be displayed within the h2 element when we'll click it. So let's try that. So we got this hello from child component. So this is the value which we are passing from the child component to the parent component using a DOM event. Let's go back to our slides now. So the first thing we did, we used an output decorator, and after that we defined the variable name or the property name which we want to give to this new event. And then we created an object using new keyword. Then we used the event emitter class. Then within a function or a method of this child class, we defined a method, and inside it we called this child event and use its method of emit, and there we gave the string which we want to send from child class or the child component to parent component. Then in the HTML file of parent component, there we receive this event using our event binding. With the help of curly braces, within the parentheses, we gave the name of event which we are binding, and that is equals to, we write the JavaScript here. And here we use the message variable or the message wherever we want to save is a property inside the parent class is equals to that event, and that event is nothing but that string which we are sending. And later we interpolated this message property to the parent HTML page so that when we click this button or when the event happens, the message was getting displayed. So now we have learned how we can flow the data between the parent component to the child component, or the reverse, the child component back to the parent component. So let's talk about structural directives. What does structural directive does and why do we need them? They help in adding or removing the HTML elements from the DOM. So here we'll be studying about two structural directives. First is ngIf and the second is Ng4. So as every programming language have the if statement, the if else statement, and the for loop or while loop or basically some loop. Similarly, the Angular provides that power of programming language using these structural directives. The ngIf performs the if else statement on the HTML page, and the Ng4 performs the for loop on the HTML page. So let's write some code to better understand what are these structural directives and how can we use ngif and ng4. So let's open our code. Let's close our parent component and parent HTML page for now because we'll need only one component. Now let's try to make a if else statement inside only our components HTML. So let's add a division, and then to add this directive we use star, then the name of the directive ngif or ng4. Right now we need ngif and equals to, and here we give the code. So we can say ngif if this is equals to true, then let's write something inside this division. Let's say h4. This div is active. Let's save this and get back to our page. As the page refreshes, we see this text which says this div is active. Now let's try to turn this ngif equals to true to false. Save our code and go back to our page, and we see the text disappeared. Let's try to inspect it at the same time. Let's inspect this element here. We don't have any div tag inside of our body, but although in the HTML page we have written that div tag. So when we put ng if equals to false, that code does not go to the front end because Angular hides them completely. We can do the same division turning off and on using CSS, but there if you inspect, you'll be able to see that no, the division code is still there. It's just that it's hidden. But using these directives, we can completely remove them from going onto the HTML page, although we have all the code present inside our HTML file. Let's close this. So this is how we use the ngIf straightforward to activate or deactivate a particular HTML element. Let's try to use the if else condition here. So, and also we can interpolate this or use a property binding here to replace this false, and we can replace it with some property. So let's create a property which is of type bool, and it's called if else, and it is of type boolean, which for now is true. So this if else variable or the property name, which is a boolean type, it equals to true now, and we'll replace that. We'll replace this with our false statement here. Now let's try to add the else statement too. So to add the else statement, first we need to use a colon here to specify the statement is over. Then we use the then keyword, or sorry, then we use the else keyword, because if then else keyword, then we can use the template reference variable here. So whatever name we will give, that we can use as a template reference variable, and we will not need to go to our property or our uh, class to specify the variable name. We can just use the template reference variable here. So we can call it else, and the variable name may be else block. So if else this property is true, then only this division will be active. Else, it will look for the else block variable template reference variable in the whole HTML page and will activate it accordingly. How can we use and create a new division? We can use the ng template here. So it is just like a division. It's just that we can use the template reference variable inside it. So ng if ng template and then calling our variable else block using hashtag. And inside this, we can again have an H4 template which says this ng template div is active. Now let's see what happens in our page. Our page says this div is active, which is our if statement div. Now let's try to switch or toggle this if else property to false. Let's save this. And when we go back to our page, we say this ng template div is active, which means our if else is working. Earlier, this division was active. Now this ng template division is active. This is how we can use if else in our code. We can also replace it as it does not look very similar to what the if else in other programming languages look, where one is division, other one is ng template. So we can try using a particular way like this. We can make a division, then we can call our ng if directive, and this is equals to that property which is if else, and then we can use a then and a else keyword. So after then we'll write our first variable template reference variable, which means maybe a then block, else the second variable, the else block. Let's delete this part. We have written our JavaScript code inside this. Now this division ends here, and now we can use two ng template, one for each. One is for this then block template reference variable, and the other one for the else block. So whatever this division will be there, so whatever is active on the basis of this property, the particular template will be active. So it looks much more better and much more understandable for third person. Now we can drop in our HTML tags inside here. We can say this is the then block and the other one is the else block. Let's save this and go back to our code. Because this if else property is false, we are saying this is the else block. Because this ng template is active, the prior one is false. So this is how we can use the ng if directive. Similarly, let's try to create an Ng4 directive. For Ng4, first we need a property in our class over which we will iterate over. So basically for loop needs something to iterate or to cover the values one by one. That's why we need a list there. So let's create a list of colors and then we'll try to change the color of text according to that list. Let's try to create a property which is of name colors, and this is equals to an array which contains different name of colors, maybe red, blue, green, yellow. This is just a simple list, and when we'll iterate over this, means we'll use the for loop or the Ng4 directive. The first value will be red, then the blue, then the green, then the yellow. And according to that, we want to style our text to change its color. So we'll also use the ng style tag. Let's create a new element, and it can be of a new division maybe. And here we can apply this ng4 directive, and this is equals to, please see this how we write the for loop. So first we say let to call a variable name. Now the name of the variable may be block or text color. Text color is variable name because it starts with let, then a text color. Then we use of to specify from where we are getting these variable, and we are getting from colors list. So let text color of colors will loop over all the colors in the colors list, and every time the value which is saved in the array will be the value of this text color variable. Let's close this division, and inside this we can have an H4 element, and we can use the ng style here to style our text. So this ng style property binding is equals to an object where we can give color is equals to this variable, because this will save the string and will replace the string here, and it will give the color to the text. And here we can say whatever text we want to be printed. We can say for loop in ng, in short for Angular. Let's save this and go back to our page. And as you can see, we have text displayed in 4 different colors: red, blue, green, and yellow, the exact order we gave inside our list. So ng style was just to style the color or change the color of the text using the ng style property binded to an object which is equals to color, then the variable name of the color, where we use the ng4, which actually created these 4 divisions because it ran for 4 times. If we inspect these elements, we can see each one is inside a division. So we created only one division and used ng4 over it. But in the terminal, we can see there are 4 divisions here, each one for each color. You can see this here, style is equals to color red, where the lower one says style equals to color blue. So these 4 divisions were created by Angular while we only write one in our HTML file. So this is how we use Ng4 directive, and we can generate, add more HTML elements, and we need to write them only once. So let's go back to our slides now. You can think of ngIf as an example shown in the slide. We can create a division, and we can create a method which checks if a person has logged in or not. With the logged in method, we can specify that, okay, if the person has logged in, then show his name after hi. Or we can use an ng template to deal with condition where the person has not logged in, and there we ask him to log in. So you can think of various cases where you'll need to use ngIf and ngForce, and that's why they are very important to learn. Let's know about what are services in Angular and why do we need them. So Before, we studied about how we can transfer the data between parent component and the child component. What if the relationship between these components is not a parent and a child relationship? Then what? How can we share data between parallel components? There, the services comes in picture. So now let's see how we can transfer data first, and then we'll know how we can generate a service and use services in Angular. Let's go back to our code and let's generate a new component so that we have two components, and then we can try sharing the data between them. I'll go to my terminal, and here to generate a new component, the command was ng, then generate. In short, we can just write G, then C for component, then the name of the component. Maybe in our case, our first component was named first, second can be second. Hit enter. The Angular will generate new files. As we can see, it has created 4 files, and we can see here there's a new folder in green. It is second. We have all the 4 files: CSS, HTML, TypeScript, and the spec TypeScript. So this is our second component. Let's go to second component.ts file, and this is the class, and this is the selector. Let's copy this and add our selector to app.component.html, or you can say the parent HTML. Let's write in H2 that it is a second component, and below this we can add our HTML selector and save it. Let's see what is inside our second.html component. It is a paragraph which says second works. Let's go back to our page and see if our page is still working. We can see within our second component, the second works is being displayed. So whatever is in before this H2 heading, which is second component, is from the first component, and below this is from second component. Let's try to share some data, and let's try to create this data in our first component.ts file. Let's say we can create a new employee list, which we can imagine as it is of all the information about our employees of our organization is being saved inside. So we can say employee, and this is equals to objects where it can be name is equals to boss, then age is maybe 21, then salary we can say some zeros. Similarly, let's add another one, and another one. We can say employee 1, employee 2, employee 3, age is 22. Then this can be 23, this can be 24. We can reduce 1 zeros. So this is our employee list, and it contains the data for the employees of our organization. Let's try to print this in our HTML. We can use the Ng4 to iterate over the employee, and we can print them one by one. So we create a new division and we use the Ng4 directive, and this is equals to let E of employee and within this division we can add just a paragraph, then use interpolation to use this e variable dot name to access the name of our employee. Let's save this and see if it's working. Here we can see the name of the employees are being printed as we expected. Now, how can we transfer the same list to our second component? What if we write the same thing in our second component .html file right here? This will not work because in its constructor there is, as you can see, we are getting an error because we don't have employee in the second component class. We don't have anything here. The list does not exist. So this is where we need the services who can transfer the data. But you can say we can do just copy paste here. We can just copy our data and we can place it inside our second component and it will work. We can see the whole information. But this violates our do not copy code protocol. Right now we have a very small data. What if this is about millions and millions of data points? Then copying and pasting it in another file is not an option. That's why we need something which can replace this, and this is where the services comes in picture. We can directly go into the implementation of services, but it's always better to understand how the things work before actually making use of them. So how does the services transfer the data between these two component classes? So it uses something called dependency injection. Dependency injection is a framework, or you can say is a method of doing or making or sharing a data between the classes. Let's write some code in a normal TypeScript file to understand what are dependency injection and how an Angular provides that framework where we can use services to transfer the data. So I'll create a new file and let's call it demo.ts and let's try to create a car. Every car needs engine and tires. So engine and tires are the dependencies of this class car. So let's write our class of engine. We can leave it blank for now with a blank constructor. Similarly, we can create a class of tire. Similarly, we can create a car, but car needs engine and tire as a property because the car is dependent on these two things to actually get completed. Now let's call, let's assign this engine and tires as a engine and tires type. We can say this engine is equals to, we use the new keyword to specify to make an object of type engine. Similarly, we can say for tires. So every car is dependent on the engine and tire class. That's why engine and tires are the dependencies of the car class. Right now, all the things will work perfectly fine. But later on, if someone updates the engine and now engine needs some parameters while defining, then we get an error because we don't have that parameter inside our constructor here, and we cannot transfer all the parameters back while defining our car class. That will just create a mess, and we will have to change the code everywhere in wherever we wherever the dependencies are. So we'll always have to track the dependencies of things, and if they get changed, then we need to change our whole code. So the better way to do this is using a dependency injection. How we can do that? So rather than creating a new object here, we pass an objects inside the constructor only. We can say we are providing an engine and tires as an object inside our constructor. And here we are just assigning them and creating an instance and saving it inside our car class. This is of type tire engine and this is of type tires. So now if I give some parameter to this engine, the car class will not show any problem because the engine and tires are the objects which we are injecting. So this is the dependency injection. We are injecting the dependency. So whenever there's a change in engine, only the engine class will be dealt with. We need not to worry about all the other parts of the code and all the dependencies of the wherever the engine is the dependency of the other class. So Angular provides a framework which handles all of this thing in background, and we just use services and we create a method inside these services and we can use them inside different components. So finally, now we can start with generating services. So finally, now let's start with generating services. And to do that, we'll open our terminal and here we'll write ng, G for generate, S for services, and now the name of service, we can call it employee. Hit enter and you can see it created two files, employee.service.ts. This is what we want and it's right inside our app folder. We have employee service.ts. This is our service. Now note that to start with services, don't forget to include it in app.module. To include it, we go to the providers and add the class here. Let's copy our class name, which is employee service. Then in app module, we paste it. And at the time of pasting your class name, don't forget to import it too, or you can directly click on the one with some extra text at the end so that it gets imported automatically. So here's the services, employee services from employee.service. Let's save this file and go back to our employee services.ts. Here we'll create a method. We can call it get employee. This method, and inside this method, we can return our object, which was the list. So let's copy our data. So let's copy our list, which contains all these objects, and paste it in our employee get employee method. So whenever this for this method get employee will be called upon the object of employee service, it will return the list of our data. Now let's go to our components and try to access this. Let's go to our first component.ts file. Here, let's delete this and just make it an array. And let's copy this, and we need to go to the constructor. Let's scroll over. Now let's define it just above the constructor so that we can look at the same time. Inside our constructor, we need to call the employee services here. We can use a shorter form to create a variable at the same time of calling it. We can use private keyword, then a variable name, maybe employee service. And this is the of type employee services. Click on the one with some extra added text at the end so that it gets imported automatically. You can see it gets imported automatically. Now use the ng on it method of this component class, and here we'll use this dot employee is actually equals to this private variable, which was employee serve. Then we'll call the method get employee. And this dot employee service. So now after defining the employee to be of type any, we can pass this data, the array, to our employee property. Now let's go back into our second component.html, the second component.ts file, and do the same. We say, let's copy paste our code here. So we had this. Let's copy paste the exact thing in our second component.ts. And here it's not imported, so let's call it again so it gets imported again in our second component. Now let's go back to our page and let's see are our result displaying. So we can see we gave the data only once in the services class, but we are calling the data in two different components which are parallel to each other. The first folder and the second folder are not inside each other, they are in parallel. So they don't have a relationship of parent or child. So they are parallel components, and still we can send the data in between these two components from service class. Let's have a small review and we'll go back to our slide. So the first thing which we did was we used the command line interface which says ng generate serve, then the service, then the service name. In our case, we had employee. You can also use the shorter form which says ng, g for generate, s for service, and then the name of the employee, and then the name of the service. Then we also need to register this service in the app module.ts file. There in the providers, we gave the name of the class of the service class and also imported it at the same time. Then we went to the constructor of our components and there we used this type of way of calling a variable, which was we used a private keyword, then a local variable name, then we typed with a colon after that the class name. So this variable name which we gave also became a property at the same time. Then because this property was private and we need to use a public property to display content on the HTML, we go on to ng on init method and there we gave an employee list equals to this variable and then we call the method getEmployee, which resulted in giving us the list of data. And in the HTML, we had Ng4, which iterated over this list and printed the data. So this is how one service data was shared between two different components.